They told me my father died in 1995. I was 12 years old. I remember the exact chair I was sitting on when they said it. A hard wooden chair in my aunt's living room, the kind that made your legs go numb if you sat too long. No one cried when they told me. That was the first strange thing. My aunt cleared her throat. My uncle stared at the floor. My mother held my hand too tightly. "He's gone," my aunt said. "An accident." That was all. No details. No stories. No body. At 12, I didn't know how to question adults. I only knew how to absorb silence. So I nodded. And just like that, my father disappeared from the world. After that day, his name was never spoken in our house. Not on birthdays. Not on holidays. Not even when I asked. If I said Dad, the room would change. My mother would look away. My aunt would change the subject. Eventually, I learned the lesson. Some names are not allowed. Some questions cost too much. So I stopped asking. Years passed. Then decades. Life filled the space where questions used to live. School. Work. Marriage. Loss. I built a life that did not include him. Not because I didn't miss him, but because you cannot miss someone you are taught never to remember. I told myself he was a shadow. A story with no ending. Until yesterday. Yesterday, I boarded a bus at 7:40 in the morning. Same route I take every weekday. Same cracked seat near the window. The bus was crowded, loud with tired breathing and rustling bags. At the next stop, an older man got on. He moved slowly, carefully, and when he sat down beside me, my body reacted before my mind did. My hands went cold, because I knew that posture. That way of lowering himself into a seat. That pause before exhaling. I had seen it 1,000 times before, but only in memory. I stared straight ahead, afraid to turn my head. Afraid of what I might see. The bus pulled away. And then he spoke. "You still bite your nails when you're nervous." My heart stopped. No one else in the world knew that. Not my husband. Not my friends. Only one person ever did. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head. And I looked into the face of a man I had buried in 1995. I didn't scream. That surprised me later. People always imagine moments like that as loud. Tears. Shouting. A bus stopping suddenly. None of that happened. The bus kept moving. People kept scrolling on their phones. Someone coughed behind us. And my father sat beside me, alive. He looked older than the man in my memories. His hair was thin and grey. His face lined in places I didn't recognize. But his eyes were the same. That deep, steady brown. The kind that never rushed you. I swallowed hard and looked back out the window. If I stared too long, I was afraid he might disappear. "You always did that," he said softly. "Look away when you're overwhelmed." My fingers curled into my coat. My voice wouldn't come. So many questions tried to rise at once that none of them made it out. How? Why? Where were you? They tangled in my chest. He didn't look at me as he spoke. Just sat there, facing forward, like two strangers sharing a ride. "I didn't know if you'd recognize me," he said. "But I knew you'd feel it." That was how he always spoke. Not dramatic. Not apologetic. Careful. I remembered him tying my shoes when I was little. Patient. Methodical. Never pulling the laces too tight. The bus slowed at a red light. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure others could hear it. "Everyone said you died," I finally whispered. He nodded once. "I know." That was all he said. No denial. No surprise. Just acceptance. My chest burned. "You let them think that?" I asked. This time, he turned toward me. And for the first time, I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Fear. "I didn't let them," he said quietly. "I didn't have a choice. The light turned green. The bus lurched forward. And just like that, my entire childhood cracked open again. I remembered the night he didn't come home. The way my mother paced the kitchen. The phone ringing and ringing. I remembered asking where he was. And being told to go to bed. After that, everything went quiet. No stories. No photos. Even his clothes disappeared. I had assumed it was grief. Now, sitting beside him, I realized it had been something else. Control. "Where have you been?" I asked. My voice shook. He sighed, long and slow. "Living," he said. "Just not the life I wanted. I wanted to grab him. To shake him. To demand answers. But I stayed still. Because part of me was still 12 years old. Still afraid that if I asked too much, he would vanish again. The bus approached my stop. Panic surged. "I get off here," I said quickly. "So do I," he replied. That made my heart twist. The bus doors opened. Cold air rushed in. We stood up together. And for the first time in almost 30 years, I walked beside my father. Not as a child, but as someone who had lived an entire life without him. Outside, the street was quiet. Early morning light reflected off wet pavement. We stood there awkwardly. Two people who shared blood but not history. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. He nodded. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I just needed you to know I didn't leave you." That sentence broke something open inside me. Because all my life, I believed he had. We stood there longer than we needed to. People passed us on the sidewalk, moving with the purpose of morning routines, unaware that time had folded in on itself right there at the bus stop. "I don't understand," I said finally. "Everyone said you were dead." He looked down at his hands, rubbing his thumb slowly over his knuckle, the way he always did when he was choosing his words carefully. "I know what they said," he replied. "And I know what it did to you." That hurt more than the surprise. "You knew?" I asked. "You knew I grew up thinking you chose to disappear?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up and met my eyes fully. "I knew," he said. "And that's the part one carry every day." Something in his voice told me this wasn't a story he had rehearsed. It sounded heavy. "Worn. Come," he said gently. "There's a cafe across the street. If you want, we can sit." I hesitated. Saying yes felt like betrayal. Saying no felt like losing him again. So I followed him. The cafe smelled like coffee and toast. We chose a small table near the window. When he sat down, he took off his coat carefully and folded it beside him. That small, familiar habit made my throat tighten. "You remember everything," I said. "I remember you," he corrected softly. I took a deep breath. "Tell me about 1995, I said. "Tell me why I buried you without a grave." He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he began. "That year," he said, "was when everything collapsed." He told me about the factory he worked at. How it shut down suddenly. How debts followed quickly after. "I didn't tell your mother how bad it was," he admitted. "I thought I could fix it quietly." I recognized that instinct immediately. It was the same one I had inherited. He spoke about a man who offered him work. Cash work. No papers. I said no at first, he said. But then the threats started. My stomach tightened. "Threats?" I repeated. He nodded. "They weren't after money anymore," he said. "They wanted silence." He explained how one night he was taken. Not violently. Efficiently. Driven out of the city. Given a choice that wasn't really a choice. Disappear. Or bring danger home. "They said if I vanished," he said, "they would tell your family I was dead." I stared at him. "They made you fake your death." "They made sure I couldn't come back," he replied. And I believed them. I thought about my mother. Her silence. Her tight jaw whenever his name came up. "She knew?" I asked. "Yes," he said. She knew enough. My chest ached. She let me believe you were gone. He nodded slowly. She thought it was safer for you, he said. And in some ways, it was. I leaned back, overwhelmed. All those years of grief. All those nights wondering why I wasn't enough for him to stay. None of it had been true. I watched you grow from far away, he continued. I looked up sharply. You watched me? Not closely, he said quickly. But I checked. I made sure you were okay. That made something inside me flare. You could have written, I said. I couldn't, he replied. Every trace was watched. The cafe grew louder around us. Cups clinked. Someone laughed. My life felt split cleanly into before and after this table. Why now? I asked. Why today? He looked at me with a small, sad smile. Because the people who kept me hidden are gone, he said. And because I saw you on the bus last week and realized, if I didn't speak now, I never would. I stared at him. You saw me before yesterday? He nodded. I practiced not saying your name, he said. But yesterday, I couldn't. I felt tears rise, slow and heavy. I spent my whole life thinking you abandoned me, I said. I know, he replied. And I am so sorry for that pain. That was the first apology. And it wasn't loud. But it mattered. We sat there for a long time after that. Not talking. Just sitting with cups of coffee that went cold between us. I watched his hands as they rested on the table. Older hands. Veins more visible. But the same careful stillness I remembered from childhood. I realized then how strange it was to sit across from someone who was both familiar and unknown. He was my father. And he was a stranger. Both things were true at the same time. I don't know how to do this, I finally said. Talk to you. Be here. He nodded slowly. I don't either, he said. But we don't have to decide everything today. That sounded like him. Never rushing. Always leaving space. I thought about my life. My job. My marriage. The years of decisions I made without him. You missed everything, I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. I know, he replied. And I don't expect to be part of it now, unless you want me to be. That honesty surprised me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for a place. He was asking for permission. I felt something loosen in my chest. I don't know what I want yet, I said. That's fair, he replied. We talked then about small things. Where he lived now. What work he did. How his back hurt in the mornings. He didn't tell long stories. He answered only what I asked. When I checked the time, I realized I was already late for work. I have to go, I said, standing up. I know, he said. Outside, the air was warmer now. The city louder. This moment felt fragile. Like something that could break if handled wrong. I don't know when I'll see you again, I said. That's okay, he replied. I waited a long time already. He reached into his pocket and took out a small piece of paper. He slid it across the table. A phone number. My number, he said. In case you ever want to talk. No pressure. No instructions. Just an open door. I took it. Our fingers didn't touch. Outside, we stood awkwardly again. Then, without thinking, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I hugged him. Briefly. Carefully. He froze for half a second. Then he hugged me back. Just as carefully. We pulled apart. I'm glad you're alive, I said. He swallowed. So am I, he replied. I walked away then. Each step felt unreal. On the bus ride to work, I stared out the window, replaying everything. The silence of my childhood suddenly had a shape. It wasn't absence. It was fear. That didn't erase the pain. But it changed its meaning. That night, I didn't tell my husband. I needed time to understand it myself. I lay awake thinking about what it means to grieve someone who isn't dead. To build your life around a loss that never actually happened. The next morning, I held the piece of paper in my hand for a long time. I didn't call. Not yet. But for the first time in my life, the question wasn't why did he leave? It was what do I want now? And that question felt terrifying. And freeing. At the same time, the days that followed didn't feel dramatic. They felt heavy in a quiet way. Like carrying something fragile in your chest and trying not to let it crack open in the wrong place. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled when people spoke to me. But everything felt slightly out of place, as if my life had shifted a few inches to the left and no one else noticed. At night, I lay awake replaying his voice. Not what he said. How he said it. Careful. Measured. Like a man who had learned to live with restraint. I thought about my childhood in a new light. The silences. The way my mother avoided his name. The tightness in her face whenever someone mentioned fathers. It hadn't been indifference. It had been fear. That realization didn't erase the loneliness. But it gave it context. I waited 3 days before calling him. 3 days of holding that piece of paper, folding and unfolding it, like the decision might wear itself out. When I finally dialed, my hand shook. He answered on the second ring. "Hello," he said. "It's me," I replied. There was a pause. Not because he didn't recognize my voice. Because he didn't want to assume. "I'm glad you called," he said softly. We talked for 20 minutes. About nothing important. The weather. Traffic. The bus route. He didn't push. Neither did I. And somehow, that made it easier. After that, we spoke once a week. Sometimes twice. Short conversations. Long silences. We were learning the shape of each other again. I didn't tell my mother right away. I wasn't ready. I didn't know what that truth would do to her. Or to me. When I finally did, she sat very still. Her face went pale. "I knew this day might come," she said. "You let me believe he was dead," I replied quietly. Tears filled her eyes. "I let you believe you were safe," she said. We cried together that night. Not because the past could be fixed, but because it could finally be spoken. I learned then that truth doesn't arrive clean. It arrives tangled. With relief and anger and grief all at once. Meeting my father again didn't heal my childhood. It gave it a second shape. A more complicated one. One that included love and fear in the same breath. I didn't rush forgiveness. Neither did he ask for it. We moved slowly. Like people crossing thin ice. Sometimes I felt close to him. Sometimes I felt nothing at all. And sometimes, I felt 12 again, waiting by the door. I learned that reunion is not a miracle. It's a process. A careful rebuilding of trust where there was once silence. Some days were easier than others. Some days I wished I had never seen him on that bus. Because knowing the truth meant I had to feel everything I had buried. But other days, I felt something I had never allowed myself before. Choice. I wasn't trapped in a story anymore. I was allowed to decide how this one would go. And that mattered more than answers ever had. I didn't know yet what place he would have in my life. Father. Friend. Stranger. Maybe all three. But I knew one thing with certainty. He was no longer a ghost. And neither was I. The past hadn't disappeared. But it had finally stopped whispering. And in that quiet, something new began to grow. Slowly. Honestly. One conversation at a time. The weeks turned into months, and the shape of my life adjusted around this new truth. Not suddenly. Not neatly. It adjusted the way a room does when you move one piece of furniture and everything else has to shift to make sense again. My father and I settled into a quiet rhythm. A phone call on Sundays. Occasionally a short walk when our schedules allowed. We didn't talk about the lost years unless I asked. And even then, he never tried to explain more than I was ready to hear. That restraint mattered. It told me he understood how fragile this was. I noticed how careful he was with my time. He never called late. Never showed up unannounced. He waited. And that waiting felt like respect. One afternoon, we sat on a bench in a small park. Children ran past us, laughing loudly. He watched them with a soft expression. "You used to run like that," he said. "Fast. Like you were afraid the ground might disappear." I smiled despite myself. "I was," I said. He nodded, accepting that without defense. "I wish I could have stayed," he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. "I wish you had too," I replied. That was the first time I said it out loud. It didn't accuse. It didn't forgive. It simply told the truth. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable. Just full. I realized then that what I needed from him wasn't explanations. It was presence. Consistent. Predictable. Honest. And slowly, he was giving me that. I told my husband a few weeks later. He listened carefully, his hand resting on mine. "That's a lot to carry," he said. "It is," I replied. "But it's also lighter than before." That surprised me when I said it. The truth, even when painful, weighed less than years of unanswered questions. My mother and I spoke more openly too. Not about blame. About fear. She told me how many nights she stayed awake listening for footsteps that never came. How she thought silence would protect me. I told her how silence taught me to disappear. We didn't resolve everything. But we understood each other better. And that felt like progress. Sometimes, I caught myself watching my father closely. How he laughed. How he paused before speaking. Looking for proof that he was real. He never asked for a title. He never said, "I'm your father," in a way that demanded recognition. He let the relationship define itself. That patience gave me room to breathe. There were days I felt angry for no clear reason. Days I felt grief rush in without warning. And days I felt nothing at all. All of it was normal. I stopped judging my reactions. Healing, I learned, is not about feeling the right thing. It's about allowing whatever comes. One evening, as we said goodbye after a walk, he hesitated. "I don't want to take up space you don't have," he said. I looked at him. "You're not taking it," I replied. "You're being offered it." He nodded slowly, like he was learning a new language. So was I. This wasn't the reunion stories talk about. There was no moment where everything clicked into place. There was just effort, care, and the decision, made again and again, not to walk away. The past was still there, but it no longer defined the edges of my life. It sat behind me now, acknowledged. And as I moved forward, I understood something important. Finding my father didn't give me back what I lost. It gave me something else. The chance to choose. How close. How slow. How honest. And that choice made all the difference. We were not trying to rebuild the past. We were learning how to stand in the present. Together. Carefully. Without pretending it was easy. And that, I realized, was enough to begin. As time went on, I began to notice the smallest changes in myself. They were not dramatic. They did not announce themselves. They showed up quietly, in ordinary moments. I stopped flinching when someone mentioned fathers. I stopped feeling that sharp, sudden emptiness when I saw a man teaching his child how to ride a bicycle. Those moments used to feel like reminders of what I never had. Now, they felt like echoes of something complicated, but real. My father never tried to step into roles he hadn't earned. He didn't give advice unless I asked. He didn't comment on my marriage or my choices. He listened. And sometimes, listening is the bravest thing someone can do after years of silence. One afternoon, we sat at a small table in a quiet library cafe. Rain tapped softly against the windows. He looked at me and said, "You turned out strong." I didn't know how to respond to that. Strength had never felt like a compliment to me. It felt like something I was forced into. I didn't choose it, I said. He nodded. I know, he replied. But you carried it anyway. That was the first time I felt truly seen by him. Not as a child he left behind, but as a person who lived a whole life without him. I started to understand that my anger and my longing could exist together. I didn't have to pick one. I could love him and still mourn what was lost. That realization softened something inside me. I stopped expecting him to make the past make sense. The past didn't need fixing. It needed acknowledgement. And slowly, through presence and consistency, that acknowledgement was happening. There were setbacks. Days when I didn't return his calls. Days when hearing his voice felt like too much. He never complained. He waited. And each time he waited, trust grew a little stronger. I realized then how different this was from my childhood. Back then, silence had meant disappearance. Now, silence meant patience. That difference mattered. One evening, after a long walk, he said something quietly. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But I'm grateful you let me know you. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not as the father I lost. Not as the man who disappeared. But as a human being who had made choices under fear, and lived with the consequences every day since. I'm still figuring out what forgiveness means, I said. But I don't want you to be a stranger. He smiled gently. That's more than enough, he replied. I understood then that reconciliation is not a single moment. It is a series of small decisions. To answer the phone. To meet for coffee. To stay when leaving would be easier. And those decisions were building something real. Not perfect. But honest. My father did not return to my life to give me back my childhood. He returned to give me truth. And truth, even when it comes late, has a way of freeing you. I no longer felt defined by a loss that wasn't real. I was defined by what I chose to do with the truth I had now. And I chose to move forward. Slowly. Carefully. With open eyes. The bus ride that brought him back into my life had been short. But the journey that followed was long. And for the first time, I wasn't walking it alone. Not because everything was fixed. But because everything was finally real. And that, I learned, was where healing truly begins. As that truth settled into my life, I stopped waiting for a moment when everything would feel resolved. I realized there might never be a single moment like that. Resolution, I learned, comes in layers. Some days felt light. Some days felt heavy for no clear reason. Both were part of the same path. I noticed how my father watched me now. Not closely. Not anxiously. Just with quiet attention. As if he was memorizing the ordinary things he never got to see before. The way I stirred my coffee. The way I paused before answering a difficult question. The way I smiled when I was tired. Once, during a walk, he said, "You have your mother's strength, but your silence comes from me." That sentence stayed with me. It explained something I had never been able to name. I had always been strong in a quiet way. Not loud. Not forceful. Enduring. That was his gift to me, even from a distance. I stopped trying to catch up on lost time. There was no catching up. There was only now. We didn't celebrate missed birthdays. We didn't look at old photos. We created new, small memories instead. A shared meal. A short walk. A conversation that didn't end in discomfort. Those things mattered more than grand gestures ever could. I also noticed how my body reacted differently now. The tightness in my chest softened. The constant alertness eased. I no longer felt like something unfinished was chasing me. The past had finally stopped running. I spoke more openly at home. I laughed more easily. My husband once said, "You seem more settled." I thought about it and realized he was right. Not because everything was perfect, but because something fundamental had been named. I no longer lived with a story that didn't make sense. I lived with the truth. And truth, even when painful, is solid ground. There were still moments of grief. Grief for the childhood that might have been. Grief for the father who could have been present. I let that grief exist. I didn't rush past it anymore. Grief did not mean I was moving backward. It meant I was finally allowing myself to feel what I had postponed for years. My father once said, "I don't want to replace the years I missed." "I know," I replied. "But I don't want them to disappear either." We understood each other in that moment. The years were gone, but they were not erased. They were part of who we both became. I stopped asking myself whether meeting him had been a blessing or a burden. It was neither. It was reality arriving late. And late is still better than never. I learned that reunions are not about restoring what was lost. They are about accepting what is possible now. What is possible now is quieter, smaller, but real. I am no longer the child waiting for answers. And he is no longer the ghost I buried without understanding. We are two adults standing in the same truth. Carefully, respectfully, choosing, each time we meet, to stay present. That choice continues to shape my days. Not loudly, but steadily. And as I move forward, I carry this with me. Not anger. Not resentment. Understanding. Understanding that life sometimes hides the truth to protect us. And sometimes, when we are strong enough, it returns it to us. Gently. On an ordinary bus ride. Beside a man we once believed was gone forever. As that understanding stayed with me, I stopped asking myself how different my life would have been if he had stayed. That question no longer helped me. It only pulled me backward into a version of time that could not be changed. What mattered now was how I chose to live with what I knew. My father and I never tried to pretend the past was simple. We let it be what it was. Complicated, painful, human. Some days, our conversations were easy. Other days, they were short. And sometimes, they didn't happen at all. I learned not to read too much into the quiet. Quiet no longer meant abandonment. It meant space. And space, I discovered, could be kind. One afternoon, as we sat together on a bus, another ordinary route, he said something that stayed with me. "I used to imagine you angry," he said. "I thought anger would be easier for you." I looked at him. I replied. But I was also confused. He nodded slowly. "Confusion is heavier," he said. He was right. Confusion had shaped most of my life. It taught me to be careful, to rely on myself, to expect explanations to never come. Now, that confusion was loosening its grip, not disappearing, but softening. I noticed how my sense of identity shifted. For years, I told myself I was someone who grew up without a father. That sentence had become part of my foundation. Now, it no longer fit the same way. I hadn't grown up fatherless. I had grown up separated from my father. That distinction mattered. It didn't erase the loneliness. But it changed the story I told myself about why it existed. I stopped blaming myself for his absence. I stopped believing that I had not been enough to make him stay. That belief had lived quietly in me for a long time. Letting it go felt like setting something heavy down. My mother and I continued to talk. Slowly, carefully. We didn't argue about the past. We acknowledged it. She admitted how afraid she had been. How alone she felt making impossible decisions. I admitted how invisible I felt growing up with half a story. We did not fix everything. But we stood in the truth together. And that mattered. One evening, after dinner, my father said, "You don't owe me anything." I looked at him. "I know," I replied. "But I choose to know you." He smiled then. Not wide. Not triumphant. Relieved. That smile told me more than words ever could. I realized then that this reunion was not about restoring roles. It was about building a relationship where one had never been allowed to exist. And building something new takes patience. It takes restraint. It takes the willingness to sit with discomfort without running from it. We did that. Slowly. Imperfectly. Together. The memory of the bus ride, the first one, never left me. But it no longer felt shocking. It felt symbolic. A reminder that life can bring the past back to you without warning. Not to punish you, but to give you the chance to see it clearly. I don't know what the future holds for my father and me. I don't plan it too far ahead. I've learned that life doesn't always respect plans. What I know is this. He is no longer a ghost. He is a man who sits beside me sometimes, who listens, who tries. And I am no longer the child waiting for answers. I am someone who received the truth late and chose to face it anyway. That choice has given me something I never expected. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being resolved, but the kind that comes from everything being real. And that peace stays with me now. On buses. In quiet rooms. In ordinary moments. Where the past no longer hides. And the present, finally, feels whole. As that sense of peace settled into my days, I noticed something unexpected. I stopped being afraid of ordinary moments. For years, ordinary moments had felt empty to me. Like something important was missing just beyond my reach. Now, they felt complete. A bus ride. A quiet meal. A short conversation that didn't need to go anywhere. Those moments were no longer placeholders for something else. They were enough. My father and I never spoke about the future in big terms. No plans. No promises. We focused on what we could hold. Today. This hour. This conversation. That restraint made everything feel safer. I learned that rebuilding trust is not about intensity. It's about consistency. He showed up when he said he would. He listened when I spoke. He didn't disappear when things felt awkward. Those small things mattered more than explanations ever could. I also noticed how my body responded differently now. The tightness I carried in my chest for years began to ease. Not all at once, but enough for me to notice. Enough to breathe more deeply. Enough to sleep without replaying old questions. I began to understand how much energy I had spent holding space for a man I believed was gone. Grief without an ending. Loss without clarity. Now, that space had a shape. And because it had a shape, it no longer swallowed everything else. One evening, as we sat quietly after dinner, my father said something simple. "I don't want to be a burden." I looked at him. "You're not," I said. "But I need honesty." He nodded. "That I can do," he replied. And he did. When he didn't know how to answer something, he said so. When something hurt, he didn't dismiss it. That honesty felt grounding. I realized then that the past did not need defending. It needed acknowledging. And once acknowledged, it lost its power to haunt every moment. I no longer felt defined by a single story told to me as a child. I was defined by what I chose to believe now. That choice made me lighter. I stopped rehearsing conversations that might never happen. I stopped waiting for apologies that might not come in the way I imagined. What I needed was already happening. Presence. Effort. Truth. Those things arrived quietly, day by day. The bus where we first sat beside each other remained part of my routine. Sometimes, when I took that route alone, I smiled to myself. Not because of the shock, but because of the calm that followed. That bus ride didn't fix my life. It reframed it. It took a story that had been frozen in silence and allowed it to move again. And movement, I learned, is what keeps pain from becoming permanent. I don't know how long my father will be part of my life. None of us know how long anyone stays. What I know is this. He is here now. And I am no longer carrying a past that refuses to speak. The truth found me when I was ready to hear it. On an ordinary morning. On an ordinary bus. Beside a man I once believed I had lost forever. And instead of breaking me, it grounded me. That is how this story continues. Not with answers, but with presence. And that, finally, feels like enough. As that grounding stayed with me, I stopped measuring progress by how close we felt on any given day. Some days were warm. Some days were distant. Both belonged. I learned that closeness doesn't grow in a straight line. It pauses. It hesitates. It advances in small, uneven steps. And that was all right. My father never asked me to make space for him in my life. He waited to be invited. That waiting taught me something important. It showed me that he understood the cost of absence. He understood that presence must be earned gently. One afternoon, while we were walking together, he said, "I don't want to rewrite your past." I looked at him. "Good," I said. "Because it already happened." He nodded. "But I do want to be careful with your present," he added. That sentence settled deep in me. Careful. That was the word. We were being careful with something fragile. Not because it was weak, but because it mattered. I began to notice how much easier it was to speak honestly now. Not just with him. With myself. I no longer avoided thoughts about childhood. I didn't rush past memories when they surfaced. I let them come. I let them pass. That freedom was new. I realized how much of my life I had lived in reaction to a story that was never complete. Now that the story had a fuller shape, my reactions softened. I didn't brace as often. I didn't expect disappointment as quickly. My father noticed it too. "You seem lighter," he said once. "I am," I replied. "Not because it's easy, because it's real." We both understood what that meant. Reality doesn't promise comfort. It offers clarity. And clarity gives you something solid to stand on. I stopped trying to decide what role he should have in my life. Titles felt unnecessary. Father, friend, family. Those words mattered less than behavior. And his behavior was steady. He showed up. He listened. He respected boundaries. That was enough. I learned to let go of the idea that reunion should feel like joy. Joy came sometimes. But more often, what came was calm. And calm, I discovered, was far more healing than excitement. I no longer needed my father to explain himself perfectly. I needed him to be here imperfectly. And he was. There were still moments when grief appeared unexpectedly. A memory. A song. A photograph. I didn't push it away. Grief didn't mean something was wrong. It meant something mattered. I let it be part of the landscape. Not the whole view. One evening, as we parted ways, he said, "Thank you for letting me be here." I answered honestly, "Thank you for staying." That exchange felt like a quiet turning point. Not dramatic. Not final. Just true. I realized then that the story of my father didn't end in 1995. It paused. And then it continued. Years later. On a bus. Beside a woman who had grown strong in the silence. And that continuation didn't erase the past. It allowed it to breathe. I carry that forward now. Not as a miracle. As a reminder. That life can surprise you without breaking you. That truth can arrive late and still matter. That healing doesn't require everything to make sense. Only that it be real. And so I continue. Living with a past that no longer hides. With a present that feels steady. And with the quiet understanding that sometimes, the people we lose are not gone forever. They are simply waiting for the moment when we are ready to see them clearly. As that understanding settled more deeply, I stopped feeling the need to explain my relationship with my father to anyone else. It was ours. It didn't need labels or summaries that fit neatly into conversation. If someone asked, "How is it going with him?" I would simply say, "We're taking it slowly." And that was the truth. Slowly became my favorite word. It meant careful. It meant honest. It meant nothing was being forced. My father never tried to reclaim authority he no longer had. He didn't tell me what I should have done with my life. He didn't offer opinions unless I invited them. Instead, he asked questions. Simple ones. "How do you feel about that? What do you need right now?" Those questions surprised me more than any explanation could have. They showed me he wasn't trying to step into the past. He was trying to understand the person I had become. I noticed how different this felt from the father figures I had imagined growing up. I had imagined dramatic apologies, tearful confessions. None of that came. What came instead was consistency. And consistency, I learned, heals in quieter ways. There were moments when I tested that consistency without meaning to. I would pull back, delay a call, cancel a meeting, not to punish him, to see if he would disappear again. Each time, he stayed steady. He didn't guilt me. He didn't pressure me. He waited. That waiting slowly taught my nervous system something new. That presence didn't always vanish. That was a lesson I didn't know I needed. I began to feel safer in my own reactions. If I felt angry, I said so. If I felt confused, I named it. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He listened. Listening became the bridge between us. I realized how rarely I had been listened to as a child. Adults spoke around me. Decisions were made without explanation. Now, sitting across from my father, I felt heard in a way I hadn't before. That didn't erase the past. But it changed how it lived inside me. One day, while we were walking, I asked him something I had avoided. "Do you regret it?" I said. "Leaving?" He stopped walking. He looked at the ground for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "Every day." There was no drama in his voice. Just truth. "I also know," he added, "that if I had stayed, the danger would have followed us." I nodded. I didn't argue. Regret and necessity can exist together. That realization felt adult in a way my childhood never had the chance to be. I didn't need him to choose differently in the past. I needed him to choose differently now. And he was. I noticed how this reunion changed my sense of identity. I no longer felt like someone who had been abandoned. I felt like someone who had been separated. That shift was subtle. But it freed me from a story that had shaped too many of my choices. I stopped believing I had to be endlessly self-sufficient. I allowed myself to lean, just a little. Not on him alone. On life. On relationships. On the idea that connection does not always end in loss. That permission softened me. I became more patient. With others. With myself. The bus ride that started everything began to feel less like a miracle and more like a moment of readiness. If it had happened years earlier, I don't know if I could have handled it. I might have demanded answers I wasn't ready to hear. I might have broken under the weight of it. But it happened when it did. And that timing mattered. I didn't rush toward forgiveness. I didn't rush away from pain. I stayed with both. And in staying, something balanced itself. I no longer needed the past to be different. I needed the present to be honest. And it was. So I continue now. Not trying to define what this relationship will become. Not trying to predict where it will end. I let it exist. Carefully. Truthfully. One conversation at a time. Because sometimes, the most healing thing you can do after a lifetime of silence is to allow the story to keep going. Not loudly. Not perfectly. But real. As that sense of honesty became familiar, I stopped bracing myself before every interaction. I no longer entered conversations prepared for disappointment. That alone felt like a quiet victory. My father and I developed small rituals without ever naming them. A short call on Sunday evenings. A walk when the weather was mild. A shared silence that didn't ask to be filled. These rituals didn't try to replace what was lost. They created something new. I noticed how much attention he paid to ordinary details. He remembered how I took my tea. He noticed when I seemed tired. He asked about things I mentioned only once. That attention felt careful, not intrusive. It told me he was present in a way that didn't demand anything back. Sometimes, I wondered what it had cost him to stay away for so long. I didn't ask often. When I did, he answered simply. "I lived small," he said once. "So you could live freely." I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't want my freedom to come from his isolation. But I also understood that fear had shaped his choices as much as it had shaped mine. Understanding didn't erase the sadness. It made room for it. There were moments when the past arrived without warning. A smell. A phrase. A memory I hadn't touched in years. When that happened, I didn't push it away. I let it pass through me like weather. Some days were cloudy. Some days were clear. Both were allowed. I realized how much I had learned about endurance growing up.